You're
Hey,
alive.
good afternoon, everyone. Caught me holding in place there. I'm David Reed, and welcome to this week's edition of Artist Alchemy, where we invite artists to come in and talk about that kind of magic that they do, taking the everyday and turning it into something special. We're very pleased today to welcome special guest Sara Sealander. I know no stranger to a lot of you, artist and semi-retired Yuba. Well, she's the retired Yuba College Art Department chair, but still active, teaching a class or so. So, Sara, welcome.
Thank you, David.
So glad to
I'm
see you.
happy to be here, and I've had a lot of great technical support from Abby especially. So thank you, Abby.
No, well worth it.
And Shantae put up with me the other day. I hope she'll forgive me.
Oh, no.
Anyway.
Our pleasure. This is a full service operation here at YubaSutterArts&Culture. So we've been anxious to get you on the show for quite a while. So let's just jump right into it. Tell us about your life in the times of COVID. We all face the challenge in different ways. What have you been doing? How are you coping? What's going on?
Well, these are definitely challenging times. And I know some artists who have been able to be really productive during this time. That was not so much true for me. I've been struggling a little bit to make work because I was so distracted by everything going on. And I'm a pretty political person also. And so I was very involved with the election in my head and also virtually doing some things. And when I agreed to this date, I thought, well, the election will be over and the tension will be gone. And it's not so much, but anyway, I'm happy to be here. And when we get to the newest work, you'll see how I solved to some degree, my lack of focus. I started drawing every day on a very small format. And so I'll let you see what the result of that is later.
Oh. Well, so you're working, so that's good news.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So let's back to the beginning. When did you think or know you wanted to be an artist? How did it all start?
Well, I just always really loved to draw. And I don't think I was particularly good as a kid. I wasn't like the big star of the arts, but I loved, like when the visiting art teacher would come to my elementary school in Escondido, California. That was huge. I can't remember his name, but I remember what he looked like. I remember he gave us an assignment to draw 3 birds, all of them touching each other. So he was introducing composition. And this was probably the 4th grade. And I drew penguins touching one another. And I can still see that picture today.
Do you have any artwork in your collection? Any of that?
I don't have any of the really childhood things that I know of.
I've got an 8th grade art class drawing of hands.
Cool.
And also a watercolor of wood ducks. So that's my oldest.
Nice.
And very dear possessions. They just are, those are so special. I didn't make a career of it.
My sweetheart Andy has some of his things from grade school.
Yeah. I'm kind of a pack rat by nature, so.
And we were talking before we went on the air about one particular professor I had at UC Riverside. But honestly, all the way through school, I was so lucky to have wonderful teachers. And I remember middle school, we called it junior high then.
Right.
A teacher who would, every time, he wouldn't let us use fixative because it's an inhalant.
Oh.
And so you had to go to his name was Mr. Reed, and you'd go to Mr. Reed to have your pastel drawing or your charcoal drawing sprayed with fixative. And every single time he would say, "Let us spray." and he was just a good soul. And then I had Mr. Wilcox at Riverside Poly High School, and I learned a lot of good technique from him. And I also learned to appreciate jazz. He was a guy who grew up on the streets in Chicago and loved good jazz. And then in college, there were a handful of influential people. Professor Bradshaw at UC Riverside when I was a freshman, who made the bizarre decision to sign me into figure drawing when I hadn't finished beginning drawing, which I also had with him. And beginning drawing was a prerequisite for figure drawing. But I thought, oh, I can do anything.
Oh my God.
And begged my way in. And then it was hard. And as I told you, I learned so much from his discipline teaching. And then at UC San Diego, where I transferred and got both my bachelor's and my MFA.
I was wondering if because I was thinking you were San Diego. So.
Yeah, they both were from UC San Diego. And my amazing mentors there were Manny Farber, who became my graduate advisor. And Manny was known really more as a film critic. He wrote for Time Magazine and some other publications, eventually for Artforum, but he was a really good painter. And he and his wife, Patricia Patterson, were so kind to me. And I cleaned their house. They needed a house cleaner.
Oh, gee.
But I needed a job, and I was picking up jobs wherever I could. And when I would go there once a week, they would feed me breakfast. And then Patricia would leave a slide projector set up, and she'd say, when you stop for lunch, you need to look at these slides.
Oh.
And they were all of Italian painting. And so my love of early Renaissance Italian painting is completely from Patricia Patterson. And so I was very lucky. And I had other wonderful professors there too, but
learned painting their house. That's amazing.
Yeah. But my graduate work, my degree is from UC San Diego, but I was lucky enough to get into the Whitney Museum Independent Study Program in New York City. And it was the only time I didn't work an outside job. And I was given a studio space. It was an amazing experience. And we were given Whitney Museum ID cards. And at that time, you could get into, all the museums had reciprocal agreements. And so I could show my Whitney ID and get in free to pretty much any museum in Manhattan or in the New York City area. And it was just a charmed year. And I fell in love with New York, and I still love it.
Of course. Was it about a year that you were there?
Say that again, David.
Was it about a year that you were there?
Yeah, actually not even a full year, but it made a huge impression. I still have friends there and get to New York whenever I can. So.
Yeah. Have you had any travel plans interrupted because of COVID, or any things you were planning to do?
Yeah, and as they say, it's a first world problem when you're feeling sad because you can't get on a plane to London. But there's a major Artemisia Gentileschi show in London that has been postponed. But last summer I had planned to go to that and then go on to Florence, Italy to see the finally completed restoration of Pautillinelli's Last Supper. And that's doable whenever I can go because it's not a special show. But the Detroit Institute of Arts, this is a year out, but in February of 22, so a year from this coming February, they're hosting a major Italian women artists exhibit centered on Artemisia Gentileschi because they own a really good one, like a really beautiful Judith and Holofernes. And they're borrowing works from Sofonisba Anguissola, for whom my cat is named.
Oh.
And Lavinia Fontana.
Say that name again.
Sofonisba Anguissola.
Oh.
Sophie for short.
I love it. Thank you.
Anyway, in the United States, I know Detroit is not right next door, but in the United States, there will be a fabulous Italian women artists, primarily Renaissance and Baroque era. So 15 to about 1650. And I'm excited about that. And I also, I went to a webinar thing on Zoom last week, and it was for members of the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. And the Frida Kahlo exhibit, most of you probably know, was extended, and it's going into now late January or very early February.
Yeah.
And right now, knock wood, the DeYoung and the Legion are still open.
I was going to ask because the Crocker.
Yeah, the Crocker had to shut down, but San Francisco, I'm nervous about even talking about it. But one of the nice things that I learned on the webinar with Tom Campbell, the head of the Fine Arts Museum, there had been a Judy Chicago retrospective.
Right.
Judy Chicago, who did the famous dinner party and a super influential feminist artist. She turns 80 this year, and they had a Judy Chicago exhibit on the books that without COVID, it would have overlapped with Frida Kahlo. So if you timed it right, you could have had an overwhelming feminist art experience. But anyway, I didn't hear anything about what happened with the Judy Chicago show. And I learned in this webinar, it's been postponed a full year. So it's great. It's going to open next August when it should have opened this August. And Chicago is a very outspoken, spirited person, and she's very funny and sarcastic. And Campbell said that he had talked with Chicago and that she's making some new work that will be part of the exhibit that addresses the pandemic. And she said, this is me quoting someone else, quoting somebody else, but it was something like, COVID is Mother Earth's revenge for the damage inflicted by patriarchy. and that's Judy Chicago for you. And there you could take that sentence down and talk about it in less inflammatory terms, and there might be some truth to it. But anyway, I'm excited about that.
Good for her. Did you see the Frida show?
I did.
Did you get over? Yeah. It
was absolutely beautiful. And I saw it with my brother, John, who's an architect who lives in the city. And you met John. And if John's watching, he'll be mortified that I'm saying this, but I was surprised how little he knew of Frida Kahlo. So it made it extra fun for me. Sure. I probably would have been crazy talking too much, but he likes looking at photography, and some of the photos in that exhibit are amazing. So
wonderful. This part of the conversation reminded me to ask what is the class? You're still teaching one class at Yuba College, isn't it? Women in the art?
Women in art. However, David, I guess I'm sort of announcing something here. I chose not to, it's not in the curriculum for spring. And I was teaching last spring when we shut down. I was doing, it's a class I created and I researched like crazy, and I've told generations of students that I'm a better researcher than I am an editor. So I just kept adding things, and then so we had to split it into 2 sections. And so I was alternating part 1 and part 2, and I was doing part 1 last spring when it hit. And I did teach from March until the end of May, sitting at this table on a computer. And I did it, and I'm really proud that we made it through, and I would not have made it through without, as usual, my students' goodwill. But I chose not to continue, at least for this spring, and it's probably a transition in my life. I'm probably moving. I hope you'll let me come lecture at the Arts Council.
Anytime.
But it's just a time of change in my life, and it's been, as you can imagine, up and down emotionally around that, because I do love students. But
sure,
I believe most of not just Yuba College's art history offerings, but all over the state, I think things are probably going to stay online more than I would prefer, actually.
It sure looks
like it's not up to me, but it's a cheaper method of delivery.
Are you getting, I hate to do this good show, are you getting a background noise when I speak, or echo, or?
Not at the moment. I was a little bit.
I was about ready to shift and change microphones. Well,
Are you able to hear me okay?
yeah, you're loud and
Yeah.
clear. All right. Well, I thought I had an echo, but all of a sudden it sounds better. So whoever did whatever they did, thank you. Alex is saying yes. There's a bit of an echo. Okay. Well, let's press on because all of a sudden I don't hear it anymore. I was going to switch microphones, but so as far as the COVID impacting teaching and all of that, but can you talk about just art in general during a time like this? In fact, I'm writing an article for the paper about this issue, or actually it was a press release. We're doing a couple of art shows and an actual concert comprised of material written and art created during the pandemic. I mean, lots of art doing this. I mean, what's your overview of how tragedy like this inspires the creative process?
I think that the pandemic has made us realize how really valuable the arts are and always have been. But in a really stark time, we really need to hear poetry, music, see images that connect us one with another. And I know there are actually some artists who get upset if you talk about the therapeutic value of making art.
Oh, interesting.
But I don't have a problem with that at all. And it absolutely helps me survive. And that's one reason it was difficult for me when I was having some trouble making myself work. But I was also going through the process of thinking about whether I would continue teaching. There was just a lot going on. But I absolutely think, looking back at my long teaching career and at my own life, a lot of art making really is about figuring out. Sometimes it's figuring out what is most beautiful to you, and sometimes it's about working through things that are very painful. And if you're really lucky, taking something painful and making it into a better situation that speaks to other people. But I think if anything, the pandemic has made us realize we really need the arts to survive as humans. One of my professors in art history, I was a TA for him, he said, "What are humans? Humans are image-making animals." And I always like that.
Yes. Yeah, perfect. Well, as you point out, there are many different aspects of that. There's the artist creating the work of art during whatever period of time, but maybe during crisis like now to help process. And I mean, whether other artists like that notion or not of art as a therapeutic process, but then the other side is, the viewer, the non-artist who needs that, even if it's that simple, humble, beautiful photograph of a sunrise or a sunset or
absolutely
a bird on a wire or whatever, just that moment that kind of, it's like the utility boxes in Yuba City. I like to say it's just that little art moment. You're driving behind under whatever circumstances, you look over, you see a beautiful work of art sitting on the corner, you get 2 seconds with it, and then you move on about your day. So there's that thing, that experiential aspect of it that can distract and just help us manage and cope.
And those boxes are ugly until the artist comes along and they've transformed something that at best is boring to look at. Yes. And at worst is downright ugly. And they've made it into something lovely. So
we need more art, more than ever.
Yeah, absolutely.
During the pandemic. So let's quit talking about art. Let's look at some art. How about taking us through some of your early work, the Opus 1, so to speak, of Sara?
When Abby asked me if I was interested in being on the program today, I said, yeah, I can show what I've been working on. And she said, well, you could also show old pieces. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to show old, I'm going to show really old.
Great. Take us through this. Alex has a whole slideshow prepared.
Yeah. So this is, I'm going to step away from the camera just for a second. And this ancient thing,
There it is.
right here. You're probably saying, "Don't move away from the camera."
Wow.
It's 4 feet tall.
Wow.
And it's about 3 feet wide. And as you can see, it's an appeal Democrat. So I'll lean it back against the wall here and sit down and talk a little bit about it.
It's all right. There it is. Okay. Thanks
So
for into your inner
that's from 1977.
What's the story? What was the inspiration?
Well, just before I moved up here in 76, I'd been doing drawings about words and I did a lot of I was living with a couple of roommates, and we were freeway flyers teaching at different schools. We were leaving each other notes all the time about the phone bill and the cat or whatever. And I started making drawings of those notes. And it was just about the dailiness of your life. And then I decided to start drawing newspapers, and it's a fairly irrational thing to do because I wanted them to be readable. And I did San Diego Union. I was living in North County in San Diego, and I did some LA Times.
Yeah.
But I picked the images really carefully. And I think this is the only one I did of the Appeal Democrat. I'm not positive. But I remember one of the LA Times ones, it was when Jimmy Carter was president. And my mom phoned one day and just to chat. And she said, how are you doing? And I said, I'm fine, but it's really hot and I'm working on this drawing with Jimmy Carter and he keeps looking like a ghoul. And my mother was very much a Democrat and a supporter of President Carter. And she said, well, you'd better fix him up. And I did. And it was the bicentennial.
Yes.
And the Statue of Liberty was on the same front page. But when I had that drawing in a show at the Women's Building in LA, my parents came to the opening, and when I went over to give them a hug and say, what do you think? My mom said, it's a nice show, but you were right about Jimmy Carter. So I apparently hadn't fixed him up enough. But anyhow, she was laughing. But this one, there used to be some old buildings across from what became Mervyn's and is now Habitat for Humanity.
All right.
And there's some really old buildings, including a wonderful bar and grill called Chisler's Inn.
Oh, I've heard.
It was really funky and a lot of fun. And two buildings next to that were mostly occupied by artists who were living there probably illegally, but they were good studio space.
Really?
And they burned down one night. And we were afraid Chisler's was going to go too, but they saved Chisler's. But so this drawing of the fire was the day after. And as you can see, the headline reads, Arrest Made in Hub Fire. And it's a sad story. A gentleman named Benny Bird confessed to arson, and he was mentally ill, and he said something like, I set the fire because the newspapers and radios wouldn't let me sleep. Which is a statement from a deranged mind, but it also, to me, has a poetic reference to this day. So when I hadn't looked at this for ages, I dragged it out, and it's in really horrible shape. But if you're going to have something turn in physically into horrible shape, it's great if it's a drawing of a newspaper, because newspapers fall apart. And this is on butcher paper. It's on butcher paper, like lousy paper. And I remember Barbara Strassen, another of my professors. Actually, she wasn't my professor, but she was a professor at UCSD. She came to visit, and she gave me a stern lecture about what are you doing working on butcher paper. You have a good salary now. You need to buy good paper. This is not archivally sound. Get it together. And I listened to her, and I've given that same lecture to other people. But anyway, that was probably the last of the full page newspapers. But then, Alex, if we can go to the one with the loose leaf books, kind of. Not that one, that one. So I'm holding up, actually, this is a sketchbook. And you can see one of the drawings of the New York Daily News. Are we showing that? Yeah.
Midtown.
And it's just a sketchbook. But at the end of my first year of teaching at Yuba, I was going back to New York City. I had a chance to sublet a friend's loft for the month of August. And so I went with a dear old friend who now lives in New York, and we were in New York for August. But I hesitated at first to go on the trip because I hadn't been working very hard on my own work during the year. I have been so lucky to earn my living in the community colleges, and I treasure that, and I love community colleges. And it's a pretty heavy workload if you're also trying to be a working artist. And so I had to devise ways to make sure I got work done, because it made me happy to get work done. And so when I went to New York that summer, I decided that the New York Daily News is a sort of scandal sheet in New York City, and they run a big photograph and a big headline, and no small stuff. And so I figured I could get at least a cartoonish image done, one a night, of the New York Daily News. So I ended up doing 21 of these sketchbook drawings of the New York Daily News, and it was pretty much just to make sure I was disciplined and kept working. And but then I had to decide what I wanted to do with them if I did, because they became kind of interesting to me. I started it just as sort of physical practice and keeping it going. And then it was actually kind of depressing, because with the big drawings, I selected the pages really carefully, and they tended not to be real downers. But because I had made this commitment to draw every day, I was just stuck with whatever was happening in the news. And it happened that was when a horrible serial killer was murdering people all over New York City. Became known as Son of Sam.
Son of Sam. I was going to say, is that Son of Sam? Yeah.
It was the same month that Elvis Presley died.
Oh.
And so what I ended up doing, I Xeroxed the sketchbook pages. And one of I did bookbinding as a college job. And I just did these Xeroxes, and then I drilled them and sewed them up.
Did you hand sew those?
I built slip cases. They're really funky.
Oh my God.
Slip cases. And it turns out I have 4 of them left, and I didn't even number them. I think I did 10.
Huh.
But I did some that I hand tinted, and some I just kept black and white. And the hand tinted ones have a story, or I don't know what the right word is for it. It's not a story, it's a long statement that, if you'll indulge me, I'd like to read you what I wrote.
Please.
So it's like we're doing story time at the library now.
Oh, I like it.
And so if we were doing it at story times, I would have it like this, and I would be looking down and reading. But it's just page after page of daily news headlines. And here's what I wrote. Here's what I wrote. When artists turn to politics, they reach for black and white. It's serious business, after all. And like the newspapers, the work must be believable. But I wasn't concerned so much with the world or with believability as I was with rhythm, daily activity. The events were significant and even entertaining in a cold-blooded sort of way. Let's see, am I skipping a page? Pardon me. I'm repeating the last sentence. The events were significant and even entertaining in a cold-blooded sort of way. But I mostly needed to draw a little picture every night. Berkowitz apparently needed to shoot bullets through car windows late at night. It was a coincidence that I was drawing these particular pages while he was needing to kill.
Wow.
This is not to say that the content has no significance, but if it had been Elvis and Ethel Kennedy, there was a page about Ethel Kennedy expecting her first grandchild. But if it had been Elvis and Ethel Kennedy the whole month, I would still have drawn these little pictures every night. Where does the personal meet political? Where does form meet content? They are never separate. That's important to me. Where does the personal meet the political? Where does form, the way something's drawn, the way it's painted, meet content, what it's about? They are never separate. I needed to draw these pictures, and each personal act is linked to the past, to family, to education. Imagine a whole lot of small changes, and you can imagine, perhaps, Berkowitz saying, and Elvis alive? I can almost imagine not making this drawing. And I hadn't read that in a long time, but it resonated with me because throughout my career as a visual artist and as someone teaching the visual arts, the notion of form versus content is a false dichotomy, in my opinion. And I used to tell advanced drawing students that if I did something I liked, and if they did something that I liked that they did, I usually could not separate the technique from the subject, even if the subject was just the beauty of color, which you shouldn't say just. The subject could be an abstract, but you really shouldn't be able to separate the how you did it from the why you did it. Why
does that notion exist? Why is there this dichotomy of form versus content?
Well, sometimes thinking back to my students, I had probably an equal number of students. This is like a flip side. I would have advanced students who drew beautifully, but they would say, but I can only draw if I'm looking at a picture or I'm looking at something. I can't work out of my head. They would worry about that. And then I had other students who were equally fabulous and creative, and they would say, Sara, I can only work out of my head. I can't look at stuff. And it was the opposite. And they both kinds of students were fabulous, but we're all just different. But it's also true that the people who worried that they couldn't work from reality, you can be taught to I would say you're learning the language of realism. And the ones who did stuff super believably with very little effort, there were exercises that you could give to help them build just out of their imagination, creativity. So it's fun both sides.
Wow, fascinating. Do you have other early work you'd like to share?
Probably we should move on. I'm looking at the clock a little bit.
Don't do that. You'll get all messed up.
Yeah.
Let's just scroll through. You've got a couple other photos.
These are very sentimental. That was a watercolor I gave my dad.
Oh, wonderful.
It was in his kitchen in Riverside, and it's in my kitchen now. And that was also a gift for my dad, the autumn leaf one.
Timely.
And it was actually a greeting card, and it folds. But he liked it, and he unfolded it and had it framed. And this one is kind of hard to see on camera, but it's my tribute to a favorite super thick terry cloth bathrobe with a hood. And it's my tribute to my Wilbur Hot Springs bathrobe.
Oh.
And I told Abby I should drive up to Wilbur Hot Springs and see if they'd trade it for 3 nights at the hot springs. It'd be a good fitting home for it, and I'd get 3 nights at the hot springs.
It's a little bit, it was a little intimidating. When we were looking at it earlier, I saw it. My first thought was Rodin's Burgers of Calais.
Well, it's the bathrobe of Calais.
Heading off to, yes, their assassination or their executions. But
yeah.
Anyway.
I'd rather be a bathrobe.
Yes, thank you for bringing it back to something much more pleasant.
That's a photo silk screen. I used an old photograph of my father and his 3 brothers, and then he was a plant scientist, and I overlaid a range grass he helped develop called Blue Panic. But this is something I did when I was on sabbatical at Chico. I came late in life to printmaking. I drew my whole life, and I did, elementary printmaking when I was a kid in junior high.
You wound up teaching it.
But I ended up teaching it, but I retrained for a year and able to do that, and that was in the year 2000. So since, if my teaching career started here in 76, there was a lot of teaching years before I made printmaking part of my curriculum, but I loved it, and it re-energized me. I was about 50 when I started printmaking earnestly. So
how fun! That's one area that I need to learn more about. I'm fascinated by it and know very little about the process.
It's also hard to see on camera, but it's something called a colograph. This is I'm pointing like you can see my finger on it.
Right over here.
It's a diver underwater. The bubbles were made with Elmer's glue. You just collagraphs. It's the same root word as collage. So you start with a flat surface and you layer it, and then there's various ways of inking them. And Gil Azama, the sweet colleague who hired me and who taught printmaking before I did, he did incredible collagraphs. So
fantastic.
And this is a water-based monoprint. That's my hand holding a cell phone and it's in Italy on a rooftop terrace. The year I was on sabbatical, I spent 3 months in Florence working in a studio, and water-based monoprint. I actually had done some of that before. And I actually was afraid to tell Gil Azama that I was doing water-based monoprints, because that's a monoprint kind of goes against the definition of old school printmaking, because in traditional printmaking techniques, your goal is to print, it's still a handmade object. My students used to tease me whenever I talk about dry point, I'd go like this, because I'm making the motion of wiping ink off of a copper plate or whatever, but so it's a handmade object. But your goal is to be consistent and do an addition of 10 or 20 or whatever. But monoprints, you're making images on a flat surface and you're printing it, but you actually can't do exactly the same thing over again. You can do something called a ghost, where you rework the stain left on the plate, but And Gil was a very traditional old school printmaker. And I actually didn't want to tell him I was doing monoprints. But one of the summers I came home from Italy with some monoprints. His daughter, Kimiko, who teaches high school art and is wonderful in Tracy, Gil and Lucy's daughter, Kimiko, came home to visit, and she was using the printmaking studio at Yuba. Her dad was teaching in the ceramics, and I heard noise in the printmaking room. And I went in, and there was Kimiko, and she had beautiful monoprints spread out everywhere. And so I teased her that, well, now it's okay because you're doing it, and your dad's going to do some more. Yeah. So that was a lot of fun. And then I moved from that. If we go to the bright blue one, that one, this is an oil-based monoprint, and it's a cartoonish version, but it's actually one of my favorites of my oil-based ones. And it's about the myth of Ganymede. And Michelangelo taught students sometimes, almost like correspondence. He would send drawings, and they would copy the drawings, and he'd evaluate them. Sophonisba Anguissola was one of the people who was his extended student, kind of. Anyway, he used Ganymede with students, and so I did a sketchbook drawing in a museum in Florence, and then it morphed into this simplified version of Ganymede. And this technique, you printed three colors. It's the primary colors in pigment are red, yellow, and blue, and you'd have a blue, yellow, a yellow layer, then a red layer, then a blue layer. And so you had to, when you're putting your monoprint back through, you had to get it registered. You had to get it in the right spot, or it would be a disaster.
So it's three different passes.
Yeah. And then it'd take me about 3 days to do one. I'd say I'm having my yellow day, and then I'm having my red day, and then I'm having my blue day.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Not once, but twice when I was approaching the press, I forgot to make registration marks.
Oh.
And we came out pretty much okay, but the students, my classmates, it was a graduate class of about 10 people, and we're sharing a studio space. And so if you're getting ready to print, you'd say, I need the press in 5 minutes. And so after I did that the second time, every time I approached the press, my classmates would say, did you register? Did you make your registration marks? It helped me remember. Anyway.
So Sara, we've talked a little bit about Yuba College, and of course your long career there, and we know, of course, Glenn Husted, your successor, very well. We know printmaking is going on, and photography, and of course Glenn and the ceramics program. And you've mentioned, your continuing work there up until recently as a adjunct professor. But what have you heard, or what about the art department in general? We know that some classes have been canceled due to lack of enrollment. What's the latest?
I worry about the department, and the pandemic is really hard on studio arts all over the country. And I know Glenn is able to meet face to face, but with plastic and good safety with his advanced students.
Oh, they are actually in the classroom.
Yes, I believe so. Part of the time, and it's like half capacity, but most of the instruction is happening virtually. And Melanie Truhoff, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Melanie, who's doing beginning drawing, is fabulous. And I think she's very comfortable with the online format. A few of our adjuncts have decided to sit it out, and we'll come back when we're able to be at least half-time face-to-face, I believe. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't worried. as I said earlier, education is really expensive. And
Can you still get through an AA program in art at
yes,
college? Okay.
yes, and that's due hugely to Glenn Houston's heroic hard work. And Glenn is the only full-time faculty left in visual arts. And every time a full-time person is not replaced, it's a real hit on the full-timers who remain.
Sure.
And one of my interests, I know there are people listening who don't share my political views, but if we had a more decent healthcare system in this country so that the amount that institutions have to pay for benefits,
Right.
if that was taken out of the equation, it would be so much more likely that academic departments, not just at Yuba, everywhere, countrywide, community colleges, universities, it would be so much more likely that they would hire full-time people, because a lot of the expense is about benefits. It's not just salary, it's the exorbitant cost of benefits in healthcare. And I always joke that I was such a deal for Yuba College. Are you listening, Yuba College? Because I don't have kids. I love kids, and I'm a good auntie and a good godmother. But you didn't have to pay for any of my pregnancies or deliveries. You don't have to pay for any dependent children in my life. And I still had to pay my own birth control.
Oh,
God forbid they subsidize. I'm sort of joking, but I'm serious too. And we just need, that would be such a huge change. It'd be so good for everybody.
then you're absolutely right. The cost and benefits are extraordinary. I mean, it's just such a game changer, and that's probably a big reason for mostly part-time faculty now.
Yeah, they watch the number of units people teach like a hawk, because if you go over by 1 unit, then the district would be obligated to pay benefits.
Oh, interesting.
And that's not new. That's been true since forever.
Okay. I didn't know that, but there have to be minimum registrations to make a class viable.
That's
right?
true too.
15
Exactly. And I understand that.
Yeah.
But even in normal days, normal times, to do a great job in a studio class, if it's too big, the students don't get the attention that they need to become technically proficient. So it's a balancing act.
It's such an important resource for arts-minded students here, folks interested in the visual arts. And I know there's a great mass communications department. I've toured that studio and the photography department, and just to have that available here at a very affordable cost before a student transitions to a 4-year school, if that's their interest, it's something we've just got to really work to keep alive. So.
I don't mean to denigrate the college at all. I think there's wonderful things coming out of all of the fine arts areas, and I'm so proud of my colleagues for what they're doing every day.
Well, and the new president, Tawny Dotson's been a great supporter.
She seems terrific. Yeah, I've enjoyed
with her, and she's fantastic. We just really enjoy working with her. So
the student show last spring was virtual.
Oh, I didn't even hear about it.
It was wonderful. It looked great, and I had the fun of telling my lecture students, listen, you need to go look at this, and if you're thinking of taking a studio class, the best thing you can do is go to a student show, and if you like this work, you say, well, what class is that? I'd like to learn that technique.
How did
you were still able to do that even though it was virtual?
How'd you do the show? Did someone walk around with a camera and just work, or how'd you do it?
The show never existed in physical space. I think each professor submitted images.
Okay.
And then they put it together. And I think Melanie did a lot of the technical side.
Okay.
But it's very nicely done. And I assume that's what will happen at the end of fall semester. also.
Well, I'd love to know that, and if it's possible, I've attended the in-person events a number of times over the years, and if it's possible and appropriate, we'd love to share that with the community
That'd be fun.
through YubaSutterArts&Culture social media platform. So
Yeah.
let us know. We'd love to share that.
So we're running out of time here, David.
Let's look at some current work, and then as I told you, the hour would be over in a blink of an eye. So
thanks everybody for letting me show the really old thing. That was really fun.
That was great fun. I've never seen that work. You want to do the gallery shows real quick, or
no? Let's just skip. Where we are now is the new work. I did have shows at the gallery in 2016 and 2019, but I think people are more familiar with that. It's fun for me to show the really new things.
show the new work?
What you're looking at here, I'm being kind of silly, but I'm holding up things again. So this is a stick. This is really a stick.
Like wood.
Like wood with a nail hole in it. And this is a porcelain equivalent.
Equivalent, I like that.
So this one is porcelain. I'm having trouble with left and right here.
Bring them together. Bring them together. There you go. The other way. The other left. Yeah, that's the porcelain equivalent. Okay.
Okay. Anyway, I can't tell you rationally why it makes me happy to make fake sticks of wood, but it does. And David, I put this one in. The piece to the left is a very small puzzle made out of porcelain.
Love it.
And it's a kingfisher.
A little kingfisher friend.
I know you like kingfishers, and I have I have 5 new little porcelain puzzles that show my love of birds.
And you're fairly new to ceramics, is that true?
I am, and I owe the ceramics to the Yuba City Senior Center, where my former student Tamara Spoto teaches ceramics, and she persuaded me to give it a try, and it was so much fun. And they have reopened. I guess now they're closed again.
Yeah.
Because of but they'll come back, and
that's so sweet.
I've loved working with Tamara, and I tease her that she's so gracious and respectful, and she was my student, and I tease her that it wasn't until the 3rd class meeting she realized I really didn't know anything about clay.
Oh.
And anyhow, I've had fun. So if
you thought you might be a ringer, huh?
And if this is a collaboration, this is a trash can. I make drawings of trash, which we don't have time to fully explain. And that's good because I can't fully explain it. But this is a trash can, and the trash can was made by my friend, Janet Todd, who also works at the Senior Center with Tamara. And then Alex, if you go to the next image, I'd been making all this porcelain trash, and Janet made a porcelain trash can, and then I made the disgusting trash that went in it. Most of my trash that I draw is very elegant, and it's not organic.
Do I see a banana peel?
If you go forward again, Alex, there's a little closer view of some of the trash.
Wow.
It's little candy canes and bones and
banana peels.
And it's fun because you can pick it up and play with it. I have all the pieces of trash right here.
Doesn't Janet Todd exhibit at the theater gallery on Plymouth Street?
She does.
She's a regular there. Yeah, we've got a couple of her pieces.
I own a few of her pieces.
Yeah.
Actually.
Oh, she's great fun.
Yeah.
Great fun.
And then Alex, if we wrap up with some trash drawings. So now we're getting closer to the present moment. And as I said, I was having trouble just making myself work at all. And my sweetheart, Andy, knows my taste really well. And he works as a fly fishing guide, and near one of the boat ramps, he found this rusted hook and chain. It's pretty good size. And he gave it to me, and it got me started working again. And
Oh.
It has a stick of incense on one side, and it has a little firecracker on the other side, and a statement that revealed my anxiety about the election. And it said something like, "Are we going to pick the arsonist in chief or the firefighter?" So I'll leave it at that, and we'll move to another drawing maybe.
I love the shadow of the chain.
That was fun to do. And this one, I've made all the things in ceramic, most of them.
Because you've done some of that too, where you draw the piece and then you do a 3D version.
Yeah. And if Alex just go through to, so these are 18 6-inch squares, so they're very small. So it's kind of funny because I started this afternoon by showing you a piece that's 4 feet tall, and now we're looking at 6-inch squares.
Miniatures, yeah.
But I made myself do one square. It wasn't one a day. It was more like one every 2 or 3 days. But I kept steady. And if we come closer, we have a couple close-ups, Alec.
There we go.
They're just trash that I pick up mostly when I'm bird watching in the river bottoms. But like this one has a rusted nail and a decrepit Bic lighter that had almost disintegrated. But I thought it was really beautiful for its shape and its color. So it got to be in a few times in a few different drawings.
Featured relic. Look at that.
And so the next time I show, I'll have, there are 18 in this set.
What is it about those collections where you have like I saw one downtown once, it was 10 by 10 and they were 6 by 6 square.
I don't know. It's
about it.
There, and when I was at the De Young to see the Frida Kahlo show, there is another show happening there right now that's fascinating, and I can't remember how many thousands of people entered, but it was a juried competition that the De Young Museum sponsored. It was for artists in, I couldn't compete because it didn't include Yuba or Sutter counties. It was Bay Area counties, artists sending work in, and 2 of the jurors were Hung Liu, who is an amazing painter from China who teaches at Mills College, and Enrique Chagoya, a fabulous Latino artist. And he's at Stanford, and they were jurors, and they were overwhelmed by the amount of work, but it's hung old-fashioned style, almost floor to ceiling. And almost all of the artists it's work done in the last several months, and they have it loosely grouped by theme. But there was a section of artworks where I could see the artists struggling the same way I had, and they had these one-a-day things, and they were really, it was sweet for me to see that I wasn't the only one who went to this, okay, you can do it one a day.
I love it.
It was pretty nice. I really recommend that show if anyone can get to the Bay Area and see it.
Got to do it. All right. Well, thanks for the incredible retrospective.
Well, I appreciate it, David, and thanks to everybody who helped do this thing. And the work that you guys are doing at YubaSutterArts&Culture is amazing.
Well,
and a treasure in the community. So
we're in your honor and in your great debt. Are you ready? As the doyen of all things art in Yuba Sutter. That's our word of the day, doyen.
Already looking at my head thinking, God, my hair is thinning.
I know. We'll get your crown is on the way, but well, gee, we didn't even get to talking about Veterans Day and the artists we're working with, or artist activists or romanticans or any of that. So let's just jump ahead. Let us ask you the 10 questions that James Lipton.
Okay.
That's a fun thing that James Lipton asked all of his guests on his Inside the Artist Studio show.
I did look at them, but now I can't remember what I thought.
That's all right. That's all right. Spontaneous, first thing that comes to your head. What's your favorite word?
Love.
What's your least favorite word?
I guess then it would have to be hate, even though I use that word too much myself.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Magic.
What turns you off creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Bureaucracy.
What's your favorite curse word?
It starts with F.
Huh? What sound or noise do you love?
The ocean.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Hot rods and crotch rocket motorcycles zooming down my street at 2 a.m.
Oh, golly. I thought that was only in our neighborhood.
Nope.
What?
I don't know what it is about those loud engines.
It just ain't natural. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
That's funny because I'm really happy with what I'm doing, and I draw a blank there.
That's okay. What profession would you not like to pursue?
Dentist.
You watched that Little Shop of Horrors film too many times, right?
Or the marathon man with the drill.
Oh, right, that too. All right, and finally, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Hello. You did the best you could, I guess.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, David. It's been a
Stay
pleasure.
safe.
Thanks to everybody who helped make this happen.
Absolutely. Our technical support team, producer Abby Cecina, technical directors Alex Cecina and Shante Arroyo. Until next time, that's it for Artist Alchemy. Tune in this Sunday for Art Radio Today with Tom Galvin, Joe Moy, and yours truly with our special guest, photographer Stony Meager. I'm taking next week, Thanksgiving week off, so have a great holiday, everyone, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks with Tina Linville, Joe Moy, and Tom Galvin talking about their COVID-inspired art and music projects. So until then, stay safe, and enjoy the holiday, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, everybody.